tell me a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, sure. So I am Sage Cheng. I work at Access Now, and Access Now is a global human rights organization that works to defend and extend digital rights of users at risk around the world. And we do this through the combination between uh, policy engagement, direct technical support, and global advocacy, as well as grassroots grant making, legal interventions, and convenings such as RightsCon. It's a global event that discuss about and works on human rights in the digital age. So my work at Access Now, I am the design and UX lead at Access Now. I work in the advocacy team. So day to day, I do a lot of advocacy campaigns and also do public educations, especially focusing on digital security tips for users that involves their digital security and privacy online. Beyond that, I also sometimes do some, in addition to developing campaigns and platforms for campaigns, we also do some evaluations or research in the current digital tools in terms of how they affect people's digital rights.
Amazing. No, it's really cool stuff to be involved in. There's a lot of people I know would sort of love to be very much in that world. So it's really, really cool. As a first question, and like obviously if you don't have anything ready on this, don't worry, because this is more responsive to the chaos of the real world over the last few days. I was interested if you had anything to say about Trump's executive order last night and the sort of the battle between sort of him and Twitter and what that means for the idea of free speech, the platform publisher debate online. If you had any thoughts on that.
Yes, that is a very complicated question, and I can tell you, our position is that we absolutely advocate for freedom of speech online for users, but also it's a very complex situation when it comes to content moderation and content governance. And in this case, we actually think Twitter did what they should do.
Yes. Do you think they should have done? Do you think there's been a line that's been crossed, or is it just they finally started doing what they should have been doing for a while?
Well, they finally started doing what they should have done before, which is create a transparent and multi-stakeholder oriented mechanism and criteria for content moderation online, instead of Twitter being the only authority to moderate anything on their platform without any transparency or discussion or involvement of different stakeholders, especially civil society.
No, because they have started, the Twitter comms handle has been sort of saying exactly why they did what they did, which has been sort of really interesting to see, I thought.
Yes, so actually a few social media such as Facebook and Twitter started putting together a board, oversight board from the public to examine and oversee their public policy, especially when it relates to the content generated from users of these platforms. While we definitely applaud for these kind of decisions, we still ask for more transparency and also the reasoning and backup behind the choices they made in terms of picking the board.
Interesting. So not to get overly technical, but by and large, your position as Access Now is to support Section 230 of the Communications Act.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
So the executive order that Trump's signing is to, I'm not sure anyone's in the small print yet, but it's to address Section 230 of the Communications Act. So by and large, your position is that shouldn't be amended, or that it should be amended in a different way?
I may not be the best person
That's
to
absolutely
answer that question.
fine. This
So
is overnight news, so I'm just like curious because you guys are obviously like close to that world.
yeah, as you can see, like this thing all happens very rapidly, and our policy team is actually working really hard in terms of drafting the official position and response from Access Now. So I would definitely follow up with you when there's more clarity in that front.
No worries, no worries. So yeah, towards more to the questions I'd actually sent you across. So one thing I've been interested in is how, like, if I'm from the UK, so here the Labour Party, which didn't win the last election, had one of their policies was free broadband for everyone, and everyone was like, oh, this is like a middle class, like privileged position, like that's not a right. And then suddenly, a couple of months later, you've got public education happening over Zoom, all across the world, where people actually can't get state provided education without internet access. So my question for you, and maybe it's more of like an explainer for our audience, of where's the boundary between digital rights and human rights? Where do they overlap? And is the current situation speeding up that transition?
Yeah, totally. So I would like to say that digital rights and human rights are actually different terms of the same thing. So digital rights is actually human rights online in the digital world. As we all see that information technology has become an integral part of human life, regardless of regions or countries or social class or socioeconomic backgrounds of anyone. The trend of information technology being part of the global economy, the politics, and every aspect of your social life is inevitable. And as the far as we can see, it's going to be actually evolving more into our lives. That means what means to as your human rights in the physical world also applies to the digital world, because the digital world has become more than just a simulation of physical world. As a lot of people, their life depend on the internet or information technologies. And I'm not saying that just for upper middle class or like more advanced countries, because the prevalence of mobile devices actually has enabled a lot of people who are not traditionally on the internet to arrive on the internet and to be more connected and to have means to actually operate their life or gain revenue online, such as social media has become a major marketing tool for a lot of tourism in Sri Lanka. And in India and Bangladesh, a lot of people actually their major way to get online is through their mobile devices and mobile data, cellular data package. So we can see that regardless of the traditional boundaries between classes or regions, digital devices and technologies has evolved very deeply into our life. That means what we are exercising as human rights has to be protected online as well. This is why we say we protect digital rights for users at risk online. And I want to also add one more point that according to economists, data has become the #1 capital, and it surpassed oil in our current global world. So people's data has become a very essential part of any single person. And it's not just a property of you, but also your personal information can affect every aspect of your life. And as we can see that the trend that we are seeing right now is governments and companies are trying very hard to mine your personal data and get hold of it, and also taking control over personal data. And that is a really dangerous trend.
Yes. I'm actually going to move questions around a little bit, but like that brings me on to a point I've been thinking about a lot. So in the sort of post-pandemic world, lots of countries are testing, tracing, and so many countries developing apps, contact tracing apps that will allow you to measure. China rolled this out relatively successfully. Australia had a bit of success. Western European countries are trying to do it, but there's a lot of concerns over privacy. And one of the interesting things I've been coming across is this idea that we'd be probably more comfortable giving away our location data and stuff to a unelected corporation, say Apple, Google, but kind of fearful of giving it to a government who are supposed to be elected and accountable. And that's a strange shift that I think is probably quite recent. What's your perspective on contact tracing apps and the privacy risks there? Does the public health benefit outweigh the privacy concerns?
So first of all, there is no evidence whatsoever that has proven that contact tracing app is a major contribution to containing the virus or to stop the spread to stop the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, this is a demonstration of a, again, very dangerous trend of governments and companies who are hastily or making short-sighted decisions to get hold of data without thinking about all the aftermath. And it's against the cybersecurity or digital security. It's against the principles of cybersecurity when we talk about the integrity of cyberspace for a country or for everyone. And it's also projecting a huge shadow in the future of data protection around the world, because we finally see the trend of protecting personal data in policy field across countries. That actually a few days ago marked the 2-year anniversary of EU's GDPR, yes. Which is to this date still the best data protection regulation in this world. And other countries are trying to follow the suit, but also in their own development of data protection regulations and mechanism or frameworks, there's a lot of problem that emerges, such as the problem with digital ID, trying to digitize people's national ID or personal ID. And also in terms of all the different data that people generated through all the services that they're using, from their buying behaviors from e-commerce to what they say online on social media. And see, we have seen that the data protection is really at stake for a lot of people for Western world and for Eastern worlds. And we're basically at a turning point. We can either go for like a better data protection trend, or we can go to complete dystopia with this reckless decision of contact tracing or any intent to trace data, people's location data, as well as their behavioral data. We are actually turning to the wrong direction in this turning point.
Yeah, no, you made a really interesting point because earlier you were saying how like data is the most precious sort of capital resource every individual has, when most of the time people think, well, it's my health. Who cares about what's on my laptop or whatnot, or smartphone. But as you point out, they're both health and our digital selves are resources in this world, and neither should therefore be expendable. It's a really, really
Exactly.
yeah. So continuing on this idea of the threats and the harms that could come about this, do you want to talk perhaps about the sort of despotic regimes around the world who have maybe taken advantage of the pandemic to increase their powers and really sort of abuse digital rights? Yeah.
Well, I guess again, it's like a twofold answer. The first fold is like traditional authoritarian countries are taking more power and put more pressure on their people. So we can see that the problem of internet disruptions, the problem of government-led mass surveillance, and the problem of like constantly taking down accounts or posts online has become more severe in this world. And because it's a pandemic, it's very crucial for everyone to get access to information and communications, to stay connected with their loved ones, and to stay connected with the news so that they get the latest updates about the disease information or any health tips to stay safe. However, like we have seen, for instance, like for Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh and Rohingya groups back home in Myanmar, they have been long in dark without internet because government banned internet, especially mobile networks, 3G, 4G networks, sometimes 2G networks. And also we can see that with the elections this year, a lot of countries have already shut down the internet during the election or even before the election to control the information. And those are really bad impacts on people especially in the pandemic time.
Can you perhaps name and give a bit of slightly more detail on the countries who have done that? Just because like most of the audience won't have a sort of the global perspective that you have.
Yes, totally. Also, like we know these issues probably a little more than other organizations because we actually run this global coalition and campaign called Keep It On. It's a campaign and coalition to fight government-led ordered internet shutdowns.
Oh, brilliant.
So we do actually monitor all the internet shutdowns around the world, which is also a really complex and challenging task. There is a whole measurement community. So in terms of the countries that are recently on this enter the spotlight, Myanmar's government has shut down the internet for 2 states. These townships in these 2 states are actually largely resided by Rohingya groups. Okay. And Myanmar's government has shut down the internet for a lot of townships in these 2 states for more than 8 months. And Bangladeshi government also shut down the internet for the Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh for more than 8 months. Actually, it's probably approached the 9-month mark, or actually past the 9-month mark. So these are the Rohingya refugee groups. Out of all the people who are at risk and marginalized communities, really hit by these problem of internet shutdowns, and especially they don't have any access to information and education, as the rest of the world is moving every activity online. Also, we have seen positive cases of COVID-19 in those camps. So imagine it happens in those camps and they don't have any access to let the world or let the humanitarian aid groups know where the cases raised. So it's a really bad situation for them. Besides that, in Kashmir, the conflict zone, unfortunately, it's always in those conflict zones where people are most vulnerable.
Yeah.
In Kashmir, India government also shut down the mobile network in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and Pakistani government also has been shutting down intermittently in Kashmir, in the Pakistan-controlled part of Kashmir.
So you have both sides of the conflict using the same.
Yeah. So people in Kashmir also suffering from the problem of no access to information and communications. The health workers and doctors in the region, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, have sent a collective open letter to request for the internet to be restored in the region. But so far, there is not a very positive progress. So that's unfortunately the very dreadful situation people in these areas are facing. To add to that, I'm sorry. To add to that,
important stuff.
In the between the border of between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the formerly called Fatah regions in Pakistan has been disconnected from the internet since 2016. So people in those areas already have no access to internet, which is pretty much the only way to enable their education, especially higher education. And in this pandemic, it's not just the rights to be educated, is the problem of life and death.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, that's really sort of important and interesting to hear, because it's often, there are sadly so many terrible things happening all over the world. That sort of that angle of, especially inside those conflict zones, is quite chilling to hear about.
Yeah.
So maybe to try and take the sort of solutions angle, the positivity. How are designers like you working to, like, you're the design lead at Access now. Like, how does that, from a sort of design perspective, how should we change our systems, change our structures? What should we do?
That is a great question. So designers are often connected to the flashy side of the industry. Designers are designing experiences and designing technologies, trying to decide or help define the way that people interact with technologies, tools, and digital services. That's why designers is actually at the front line in a lot of those issues that people are facing, or a lot of problems that are affecting people's online life and offline life. It's really tricky because I don't believe that a lot of those rights issues are widely discussed in the design field or in the designer community. So it's really important to educate designers, whether you're a graphic designer, you're a digital designer, full stack designer, or UX researchers, to be really aware of all of these issues that are impacting people's rights. Whenever designers design a tool or app, they should think about the actual people and communities that these tools and technologies are affecting. Not just user behaviors, but beyond that, the actual community, like which are the communities that are otherwise not included in the designing or developing of the tools, who might be at-risk users and affected by this tool. And this is a problem that happens when a lot of apps and tools and platforms scale,
Yes.
such as social media. So traditionally, we think about, we profile users of social media. We profile like average users probably in the Western world, but we don't think about those people in the Philippines, people in Ghana, and also like people in Costa Rica, who are also using those WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, and actually putting their life on those platforms. So it's really important for designers to actually be aware of the issues that relates to human rights and put human rights at the center of design. In the design world, we always say human-centered design. It's such a flashy and buzzword. A lot of people use that without defining the actual meaning of these kind of concepts. I think it's time that we actually raise the concept of human rights-centered design. And it makes it clear that your design has to center human rights. Is a very clear concept of human rights. We have a covenant on that. So I think that makes it clearer to say, to urge or to push the designers to think beyond the traditional walled garden or the comfort zone, and to really think about the impact of technologies that would affect people. And I can give you an example, which is a lot of onboarding process or onboarding interfaces of contact tracing apps are not very clear or upfront of what kind of data they collect from you, how they collect from you, and how long they plan to retain the data, and who have access to those data, and how you can opt out, when you can delete your data from those apps. And these are really important questions for users. They deserve to know about it. It's like a very basic, if you as a normal human knows, like, I need to lock my door before I go out, as like a basic knowledge, you have to know that I have to protect my data when I use that app. So we are really behind in terms of digital safety educations, and designers are at the front line of those things. So we should think about those things. Sometimes maybe like the business model is not in favor of investing in digital security and safeties. And it is also our designers' responsibility to raise that question. Like, are we securing people's data? Are we telling them directly that we are securing people's data? If we are actually doing bad things with their data, should we think again why we're doing that? And a lot of those falls down to the policy team of any companies, and it's frustrating. Because as an average user, people don't have time and are not informed enough to read through the terms of uses and services, or like the legal privacy, or actually understand those. And it is our designers' responsibility to translate those policies that are actually impacting people to the language that people speak, and get them understand and informed, and therefore can make informed choices.
That's a really, really brilliant point there. Sort of the translating what's normally invisible and bring it. It's all about transparency and empowering people, I guess. The last big question I want to, and this is more sort of big picture stuff. So obviously, more and more people are relying on digital technologies quite literally to carry on life as usual. I mean, from online groceries to working from home. What do you think this increased dependence on technology, this sort of ramping up of the sort of hybrid man-machine 21st century thing that we're building with our smartphones and constant connectivity. What do you think this is going to, beyond the privacy thing that we touched on? How do you think the pandemic's going to transform, our relationship with technology? What's your personal prediction?
Again, I think there is the short-term impact or observations, and there is the long-term observations. So the short-term wise, we can see all the services, all the apps, all the companies and government who are developing those apps are stumbled to patch the loopholes in the services that may not be visible to people when we are not hit by a global pandemic. But in this kind of urgent situation, natural disasters, global pandemic, disease are best, I'm sorry to put it this way, best time because it triggers the avalanche effect of the remaining loopholes in our day-to-day life that caused by a lot of those services that we're using. So the short-term wise, we are gonna continue to live in a life full of holes. Perhaps that will further involve, further affect how we build trust between us and those services, and also build trust between each other who depend on those platforms. And for the long term, and I think the long term is a much more complex and challenging view for us in terms of how we interacted with the technology we create. I wonder if we're going to run on the model or the pattern that we just eager to develop a technology and implement that without questioning any potential harm it will do on human. And this is beyond like digital rights or human rights. This is involving our environment, involving all the animal rights, and involving the whole development of our society. And sorry, I sort of lost in the thoughts. So like in the long term, I feel our behavior will be definitely generation-wise will be affected by these disease and the changes of technologies triggered in this global pandemic. I don't know if that will create more gap to understand and communicate each other. I don't know it will actually create more hinders to come to a common ground for people to sit together and talk about things. And this is especially in politics. So before the pandemic, we already see the trend of nationalism and populism. I don't know if that's the pandemic actually will fuel it, facilitate that very alarming trend. And I don't want to put a really gloomy future or predictions, but I think it is the high time that we all act now. We all take actions and do the right thing to make sure that we don't turn to the wrong side.
What do those actions look like? What are your sort of key policy recommendations? Ideally, ones that are sort of that would apply to many countries.
Again, I'm not an expert in policy, so I'm not sure if I can give you the best answer. But what I can say generically is that in terms of policy, governments and private sector and public sector really should work together to create a framework, a mechanism to protect people's data. That is one thing that really needs to happen. And also, like in terms of any tech policies, there should be more public education at different levels. Because if we just develop it without making it accessible to a wider group or community, there's no way that these communities can benefit from that technology.
Yeah, brilliant. I think those are all the sort of the main questions I wanted to go through. It's been really, really, really great hearing so much of. I learned a lot personally, so it's these are things I'm often interested in anyway. So it's been a really good conversation.
Thank you, thank you for the opportunity.
No, it's been really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Sage.